Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Sorastro's Marvel Crisis Protocol painting series. In this video, I'll be painting Kingpin from Atomic Mass Games' Marvel Crisis Protocol. Kingpin is an imposing character in the game with some potent leadership abilities. He's also a lot of fun to paint, giving us opportunities to play with some nice variations in the skin tone, and I'll be using some subtle gradations of colour temperature to paint the crisp white jacket. Let's take a look at the painting stages. After assembly, I provided some grey and white zenithal highlights applied from above as detailed in episode 1. It's worth noting that if you're looking for a decent tabletop standard, you could actually leave the white suit pretty much as it is if you like. I'm then going to provide the base colours, where I'll be introducing some initial variations of skin tone for the face, and I'll also be sketching in the main shadows and midtones for the jacket to help reduce the amount of highlighting required afterwards. As usual, I'll be spending most of the time building up the highlights, aiming for a clean, bold finish and a nice sense of volume. Let's begin with the base colours. I'm going to begin by using some flat black to paint the shirt, cane and the shoes. I'm now going to create a roughly 3-to-1 mix of black leather and violet. And I'm using this for the trousers, as well as the tie and the handkerchief. I'm applying a second layer to create a solid opaque finish. Next I'm going to paint the skin using Bugman's Glow, which I've chosen to darken and desaturate a little with a touch of black. For the chin area, I've chosen to mix in a little dark sea blue to introduce some initial tonal variation. Here I'm moving on to the hands. I'm now returning to the face, where I'm going to mix some additional black into the Bugman's Glow and use this to darken down the eye area. I'm then going to suggest the whites of the eyes using Vallejo's Deck 10. And we can trim things back with the surrounding skin tone if need be. And here I'm using some black to suggest the pupils. For the cane handle, buttons and the rings on the fingers, I'm using the same non-metallic gold approach used in the previous episodes. So we'll be providing a base tone of Japanese uniform mixed with some brown violet. For these buttons, I'm keeping the paint thinned enough to allow for some natural shading to take place. For the cufflink and jewel on the tie, I'm using blue-grey pale for now, but we'll be giving them a more sparkly blue treatment later on. I've now chosen to block the tones in for the base using Stonewall Grey mixed with a little black as usual. I'm doing this now rather than at the end to help me better judge the levels on the jacket, which I'll be painting in a moment. For the sign on the ground, I've chosen to mix a reddish brown tone, and there are of course a range of ways you might wish to paint this. I've kept the paint reasonably thinned so as to allow the lettering to stand out. Next I'm painting the metal fastenings using a mix of black, white and dark sea blue. And I'm now shading the metal down with some Nuln oil. And here I'm using an Agrax Earthshade and Nuln oil mix to shade the sign. Finally, I'm going to paint the white jacket. My approach here is to create a slightly cool grey shadow tone using a roughly equal mix of Graphite and Artic Blue, and then mixing in some Mojave White to produce a slightly warmer mid-tone. This subtle shift in temperature is a nice way of creating contrast and interest without relying solely on changes in value. It should go without saying that you don't have to use these precise colours of course. Here you can see a similar shift from cool grey to something warmer from some of the colours in the Vallejo line for example. So here I'm mixing my cool grey tone. I might put some of this to one side. And I'm now mixing in some of the Mojave White. I'm now using the darker tone to block in the more shadowed parts of the jacket, and we may as well leave the very darkest recesses, such as the shadows beneath the pockets, untouched. I'm then using the warmer mid-tone to colour the main areas of highlight, sometimes working over the top of the shadow tone, and at other times I might even do a little wet blending. We'll be adding plenty more highlights here in a moment, so things don't have to look immaculate at this stage. I'm leaving quite a hard shadow here underneath the arm. Working with a slightly thinner shadow tone will allow some of the underlying shadows from the zenithal highlights to show through. We can of course apply a second layer to anywhere that seems a little patchy or uneven after the first. I found this to be true for the lighter areas in particular. Here I've just added some black to the shadow tone to draw in some of the seams and joins in the jacket, which I'll be doing more of in a while. We're now ready to add the highlights. Since the paint's already fresh on the palette, I'm going to begin lightening the jacket by adding some additional Mojave White to the mid-tone in a few stages. Notice that where possible, I'm generally moving the brush in the direction of the peaks and creases in the fabric. I'm once again using a darker grey to define some of the seams and creases. You can see I'm progressing in quite gentle increments to make it easier to achieve some smooth looking gradients. For the brighter highlights, I'm going to mix some Nacar with the Mojave White, just to tone down the levels of yellow. I might still return to some of the darker shades in the gradient to refine some of the midtones. For For my brightest highlights, I'm going to progress up to White Sands, which is a very bright ivory tone. Throughout the process, I'm aiming to balance the need to give shape to the various folds and peaks without losing sight of the overall volume, which is basically a sphere. I'm now using pure white sands for my last few smallest highlights. Next I'm going to highlight the skin by working up through Cadian Fleshtone and Kislev Flesh, which I'm also going to modify with some red and some dark sea blue to create some further variations of tone. I'm starting with a broad highlight using a mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Fleshtone. For the back of the head and the chin area, I'm using the same basic skin tones but mixed with a little dark sea blue. You can see that I'm using reasonably thin layers here, and I'm drawing the paint up towards the top of the head. For the cheeks and nose area, I'm mixing in some red, which happens to be Antares Red, but could be whatever red tone you like. I'm now using pure Cadian Fleshtone. And I'm once again adding some dark sea blue for the cooler areas, and some red for the nose and cheeks. I'm now mixing in some Kislev Flesh for the brighter highlights. I've also chosen to add some of the more reddish tones to the knuckles. This is now pure Kislev Flesh. And here I've decided to lighten things further with the addition of some green grey. I'm also pushing the levels of red under the cheekbones. I'm now mixing a dark grey to draw in the eyebrows. And here I'm placing a couple of extreme highlights with some ivory. Which I'm then going to tone down and blend into the surrounding area with some intermediate tones. And I've decided to add some ice yellow to bring up the saturation a little. These are my last few touches. I'm now going to highlight the areas of purple, so I'm returning to the black leather and violet base tone, which I'm going to lighten up to a mid-tone using a roughly 2:1 mix of violet and sunset purple. So here I'm creating my mid-tone, which I'm now adding to the base colour in a couple of stages. This is now the pure sunset purple and violet mix. For my brighter highlights, I'm mostly going to be adding increasing amounts of pink flesh. Notice that I'm focusing the light more towards the lower peaks on the trousers to strengthen the idea of shadow being cast by the body and jacket. And here I've chosen to add a little Tenere Yellow. Moving on to the shirt, I'm going to start with a mix of flat black and Caspian Blue. I'm also providing some preliminary highlights to the shoes and the cane with this. I'm now just focusing on the shirt, where I'm going to push the tone up to pure Caspian Blue in a couple of stages. I quite like how the blue is working in the overall scheme, so I've decided to push things further with the addition of some Adriatic Blue. This is now pure Adriatic Blue. And here I've chosen to add a little of the more greenish Caribbean Blue for my last couple of highlights. For the shoes and the cane, I'm now returning to the black and Caspian Blue mix and simply adding some white sands in a few stages. we can apply some pretty bright and tightly focused glints to create the impression of a shiny finish. I'm now moving on to the smaller details, starting with the diamond, which I'm going to paint using a free mix of graphite, Adriatic Blue and white sands. I'm also using this for the cufflink. As in the previous episodes, I'm highlighting the gold with some Japanese uniform. And I'm now adding some ice yellow. And this is now ice yellow mixed with ivory. Here I've decided to paint a coloured gem on the ring on the left hand, by firstly applying an undercoat of pure white. I'm now painting over this with some fuchsia. And here I'm mixing in some white sands and adding a small highlight. I'm now moving on to the base, where I'm first adding some more glinting highlights to the metalwork. And I'm mixing some Tenere Yellow into the brown base tone of the sign to sharpen the edges and lettering. I've also chosen to use some thinned Carribean Blue to add some verdigris weathering. And I might add some secret weapon rusty orange tones to the metal fastenings. I'm now refining the rest of the base as detailed back in episode 1. This might include sticking down some printed out newspapers and providing a sprinkling of urban scatter over some thinned PVA glue. I'm now adding a few final refinements and corrections before protecting the miniature with a spray of matte varnish. And this completes Kingpin. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. As always, you'll find a full product list and all of my social media links in the video description below. My most sincere thanks go to the kind patrons for funding this series. If you'd like to help support what I do, then do please consider hitting the Patreon link and pledging what you can to help me keep going. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures for Marvel Crisis Protocol. Happy painting!